We're bringing three people to the stage for this session: Stephanie Halamek at WeWork, Geoff Coyner with Qualtrics, and Weston Clark with Amplitude. They are pros at empowering cross-functional teams to use data. We'll be sharing the best practice with us for pulling this off. Welcome Stephanie, Geoff, and Weston to the stage. Come on up, guys. All righty, all yours.
Hello. Hey, awesome. Thank you. My name's Weston, and I'm a product manager here working on collaboration at Amplitude. Thanks for joining the panel. And so I'll just get us kicked off. As you know, analytics is quickly becoming a team sport. Products today are built by empowered cross-functional teams, and the old model of self-service analytics is quickly being replaced by one where analytics are more flexible and interactive. We're also seeing that centralized data teams are increasingly taking up the role of coaches and evangelists. So they're not only focused on reporting, but on partnering with product managers, with success teams, with design to go deeper into their data and uncover insights. We're seeing a new modern data experience take shape, and it's one where non-data experts can get the job done. They might not be SQL gurus, but they know the right questions to ask. And then they can work cross-functionally with their teams to drive growth in the business. This is exactly how the best product teams are operating today. We have invited two guests here today to speak a little bit about this. They understand this model and this operating model, and they have scaled Amplitude within their organizations to drive a data-informed culture. We have Stephanie Halamek from WeWork and Geoff Coyner from Qualtrics to join us to share a little bit about the insights in their organizations and tell us how they're transforming data and analytics into a team sport. So please join me in welcoming Stephanie from WeWork.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's see, I'm Stephanie, and I'm a product data scientist at WeWork. So, analytics, a team sport. I was honestly very curious to see how many people attended this talk because the topic honestly kind of feels like a rhetorical question, right? Product analytics, of course it's a team sport. There's so much to be done that there's no way that one person could do it all on their own. And yet, I'm wondering, how many of you have ever been, or at least felt like, a data team of one? I know that I have, and I sometimes find myself both laughing and crying as I switch between a variety of tasks that require vastly different skills, context, experience. I might be querying the data warehouse, building an Amplitude dashboard, setting up a downstream data destination. I might gather evidence to support changing a metric definition. The list goes on. All of this as part of my role as the data person supporting 2 products, 5 product managers, design research, and my data counterparts across the business. So I think while we'd all like to resoundingly agree that product analytics is a team sport, it doesn't always feel like that. Why is that? Well, when we're talking about product analytics, we've heard it all day today. We often use the phrase data-driven product development. I actually think that part of the problem starts there. I think that depending on your org, the data culture, how data savvy your leadership is, the phrase data-driven product development sometimes creates this assumption that the data person is going to just independently, on their own, continuously surface insights that they'll hand off to the product team to then fold into the roadmap, and the decisions are made that way. Well, that's not usually what happens, and quite honestly, that's not how it should be. Let's just go over what it takes to do product analytics end to end. So we all know that the data doesn't just materialize out of thin air, right? Someone has to decide what we want to collect data on, and in this case, it's front-end user activity. Someone has to implement that tracking. Someone then needs to make sure that the tracking was implemented correctly. Someone needs to manage data governance and make sure that we're sending cleanish data downstream. I mentioned earlier, we also ingest and model in our own warehouse, so someone needs to do that. Finally, we have data either in Amplitude or our warehouse, and so we can start to use it, right? Someone can monitor the performance of the product, can answer all of these questions from the stakeholders. Over time, hopefully you have enough context to understand what's meaningful. And then finally, hopefully, someone might be doing some experimentation, hypothesis testing, in order to drive product decisions and help shape what the product looks like in the future. Now, luckily at WeWork, I don't own all of these things, but I do touch all of them. And quite frankly, it is a lot. As much as I'd like to be focused on just using the data, I do spend quite a bit of time on just getting the data collected and set up at all. So it's kind of a shame then if in my remaining spare time, I'm the only one using the data. So I'll come right out and say it. We have struggled with adoption of analytics tools at WeWork, and not just Amplitude. I saw it with other tools like Looker and Tableau as well. I also don't think that this is a unique problem. How many of you have delivered a dashboard, maybe it was a super high priority dashboard, only to see it go unused? I'm sure many of you have faced a barrage of questions from your product stakeholders that seem fairly simple, that you would really like for them to be able to answer on their own in this cool, shiny, self-service analytics tool, and yet they don't. Why is that? Well, self-service analytics is so Web 2.0, and yet here I am on stage in 2022 talking about fighting the good fight. So why the struggle? Well, data can be intimidating. For us data practitioners, we know that data are just information, it's records in a table, right? But it's still a mysterious entity for some stakeholders, something that only the data experts can understand. And overcoming this intimidation barrier is huge in driving data literacy, because once people realize that data is not scary, their natural curiosity takes over. It's really satisfying to be able to ask a question and answer it quickly in Amplitude. And I think it only takes 1 or 2 light bulb moments to ignite someone's curiosity. So how do we overcome this intimidation barrier? How do we create more light bulb moments? Well, intimidation is a form of fear, right? So I worked really hard and made it my mission to create a safe space for my product team to explore, to practice, to ask questions, to ask for help. And I've done that with a lot of one-on-one coaching. I started with the fundamentals, how tracking works, how we identify users, what an event stream is. Then we jumped into the platform. I walked through it, showed them how to make charts, how to ask questions, and specifically how to answer questions, and specifically how to ask questions that could be answered in Amplitude. Now, anytime my product team has a question that they're not able to answer, I ask them to put time on my calendar for us to work through it together. Anytime something comes up in our dashboard review, I encourage one of them to drive and start to look into it and dig in together. This builds familiarity, which is what helps you get over that intimidation barrier. It absolutely is possible. It just takes a really empathetic coach who builds trust with their team. Okay, what else? Well, learning and building habits takes time and repetition, and I know that that's no new wisdom, right? So when I first started working with my product team, I expected them to develop their own rituals around viewing dashboards. But I kept fielding questions from them that were clearly answered on the dashboards that I had made. So I suspected that they weren't using them quite as often as I would have liked. I took matters into my own hands, and I set up a weekly dashboard review for us. We made it a habit as a team to start the week by aligning on our core metrics and the status. And in these meetings, we often also surface additional questions to dig into, and even hypotheses that we might want to test in the product. So we've built this habit. We start our week by looking at our core metrics, and I really hope that it's a habit that my product team takes with them, no matter what they're working on. Finally, data-driven does not mean that the data person does everything. And now this is a culture thing. This is something that's hard to shift, right? Culture and precedent is hard to change. So what really moved the needle for us was a clear ask from product leadership to their product teams. They asked their product managers to own their metrics, to get comfortable answering questions in Amplitude, and to drive their decisions with support from data. So, did this all work? Are we better adopted? Short answer is yes. We have seen growth in active users in the last 7 or 8 months since I started working on evangelization. That's great, but what I'm more proud of is our growth in learning users. So learning users are users who've had their content consumed by 2 or more people. So these are not just users who are viewing dashboards. These are not just users who are exploring on their own, but keeping it to themselves. These are users who are creating content and sharing their insights with others. And that's how you really know that the data is being used. So I want to leave you with my perspective on data-driven product development. I think what we're actually aiming for is data-fueled product development that's driven by product but fueled by data. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think like Stephanie, many of us at times when we're trying to get an analytics discipline going at our companies can feel like we're putting the team on our back. And I don't know, I mean, I think at first that could make you feel like a hero, but it also just leads to burnout. So really, I want to talk about, like Stephanie did, how we turned data into a team sport at Qualtrics and really made these heroic efforts more manageable. So first of all, I'm Geoff Coyner, and I lead the product analytics team at Qualtrics. We've been building the analytics discipline there for about 3 years. And before Qualtrics, I was at Microsoft, where I worked as a data scientist on the Outlook web app. So I've seen a lot of different teams and how they do this. At Qualtrics, today, we support over 700 monthly active users of Amplitude at Qualtrics, and we actually have a small team of 6 analysts, data scientists, and analytics engineers who help us do this. We're supporting around 50 PMs and hundreds of engineers in our mission. And a big part of our mission, and the only way we can accomplish this, is empowering teams to actually use usage data. Despite our small size, we're still able to accomplish a lot of this while carving out time for more data science-y or engineering work that helps the team get excited about coming to work in the morning and also helps us really pursue bigger questions. And this is only possible because we've developed analytics expertise beyond the analytics team. So in this talk specifically, I want to give you some insights into strategies and tactics we've used to do this and really help you if you're on a similar journey. But first, I want to give a quick overview of Qualtrics, because if you're like most people, unlike WeWork, you might not have heard of us. Basically, though, I think a lot of people think of us as a survey company, but we're a lot more than that. Really what we are is we are increasingly becoming leaders in experience management, which is about helping companies better understand their customers and employers better understand their employees through all feedback channels, including surveys. To deliver on this mission, though, our company has developed an increasingly long list of features. And if this looks like an eye chart, I can confidently say I agree, although don't tell my sales team that. But this is part of what's made it necessary to scale analytics beyond our small team, since there's just no way we could develop the domain expertise possible to be everywhere we're needed and to help all these different teams that need our help. Our journey to analytics success did not happen overnight, so I really want to start by going back to the beginning. For a long time, Qualtrics was successful actually without any clickstream data. Anyone who works at Qualtrics knows we're pretty sales and marketing led, and data is a little bit late to the game. As our product grew and our competition increased, though, our leadership knew they needed to evolve and get on board with industry best practices. Our team started 3 years ago with only 2 data scientists who are actually here at the conference, Stefan and also Stefan. And they were the first in the company to really try to make sense of this large body of work. They quickly ran into challenges, though, one of which was just making sense of the data. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this. At the time when we started trying to figure it out, it mostly consisted of a bunch of log data, which was incoherent and scattered, and everyone was wondering why we couldn't figure it out. Along the way, we adopted Amplitude to help with this, but I wouldn't be up here today if I could just tell you to just install Amplitude and that'll fix all your problems. There's a lot more to it. But honestly, it was a great starting point. Unfortunately, though, what we found when we adopted Amplitude was teams just started sending data to it, so it started asking questions, and we were bombarded and fighting fires. This left our team feeling like we weren't really moving the needle on the most important questions. Additionally, the data we were collecting became unmanageable, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this. We would get new data from the product that would pour in, and the analytics team had no context for who was sending the data, what they were trying to measure, what the point was. And tools like the Instrumentation Explorer are great, but they can only get you so far. This is about when we had an existential crisis and decided to think strategically, and this gets into the strategy part of my talk. This is when we realized that our team existed really to serve in 3 areas. And we knew that these areas actually mapped really nicely to business questions that we'd been getting all along. So I want to take you through those real quick. The first one is North Star metrics. And what this is it's about figuring out how product usage is actually impacting the business and which metrics really drive business results. We also knew this involved giving visibility to executive stakeholders, et cetera. Second was how are the features we're launching adding value and really improving anything that our customers care about, and also in a way that impacts the bottom line. And I like to think of this as feature success. And then third, how can we get customers to actually utilize and get value out of a constantly expanding toolkit of features so that they hopefully renew and ideally expand their license and pay us more for these features. So this is really the framework we use to help us think about this. And the nice thing about this framework is it actually then got us thinking about who across the organization we needed to enable with the usage data and empower more strategically. For example, when we thought about it, we realized feature success is about engineering, product management, and design. And it's about making sure that they are launching features that are adopted and delightful to use. Sales success is about making sure customer data and customer-facing teams have visibility into how customers are using the product and using that to make strategic recommendations. And North Star metrics is about making sure that there's a good understanding of what drives business outcomes from usage and giving visibility to one source of truth for those efforts across the company. So once we turned this corner, we kind of were able to also then make sense of a lot of things that we were doing tactically, and I'm going to get into that next, that was making all of this come together. And those were designing our data, self-serve tools, and great data governance. And it helped us to get more deliberate about those efforts, and I'm going to show you how they laddered up to the top 3 things in the pyramid here that we were after. And we do call this our product analytics pyramid. Okay, so now my favorite part, which is tactics. Let's talk practically about how we designed our data, and I really want to talk about this because I think this is important to making sure everything came together for us. As I mentioned, when we first adopted Amplitude, our data was a mess, and we were highly reactive to new events coming in. And this works great for things like page lands that are broadly applicable, but it really didn't help you go deep on features. Like a lot of what we had was noisy and just underutilized. And honestly, a lot of the events we were getting initially were just like whatever the engineering team thought was easier to implement or whatever one engineer thought was important. And just due to the complexity of our product, like a lot of times these engineers didn't have the right context, and who could blame them? But this meant we were really not doing the right work of thinking about the domain, and we just were overwhelmed with data. And many teams just gave up as a result. So to fix this, the first thing we did, and I credit Stefan and Stefan for this, is we designed a process where all new feature launches, when requested from our team, we'd first pull in the PMs, the designers, the engineers, into what we called a problem space map session, where basically we would map out the research questions for a specific feature area. And initially we thought this would be super hard. We wouldn't have time to deal with all the teams across the company, too complicated, too many teams. But what happened is we got our framework solidified. Teams expect to game this process. We've been doing this for a few years. And nowadays, actually most teams and most parts of the product start with a problem space map. And it's pretty normal at Qualtrics, and teams just expect this. Next, we basically map these problem space questions into a taxonomy. And this is where we actually start to get into the data points we want to start to collect. And I think if you saw Crystal's talk earlier, she did a great job talking about how she's done something similar as well. Building one of these documents really enabled us to efficiently think through what data we minimally need to answer research questions, and it also helped us prioritize, because as you all know, engineering teams don't have time to do everything. To simplify the adoption of this framework for engineering, and this is where we start to get into design, we've actually even started putting data into design documents such as Figma files and translating them out of Google Documents. And this has been awesome because these Figma documents tend to be living documents that are constantly updated as the design changes, and that helps keep our data updated as well. It's also made this work more accessible. Once the data points are implemented and they start getting sent, we are always making sure we add descriptions into Amplitude, and this gets into the governance piece, because it's really important to make sure that the descriptions live in the places where users will see them. And so as tedious as this work is, it's been essential, I think, to our success. Okay, so how has this helped us with the analytics pyramid, in particular the feature success? That's what I want to get into next. One thing we noticed is this: as data got cleaner, more and more teams started building their own charts and dashboards. And this is really when we started seeing that curve that I showed initially increasing. And this happened sometimes without even involvement from our team, and this was exactly what we wanted to start seeing happen. The notifications team in particular is one I want to zoom in on. They've done a great job making sure that they have clean design data dashboards at the ready, and also clear success metrics before they roll out any changes in the product. And they've done a lot of this work without any involvement from our team. So what I'm going to tell you about is actually something that our team was not very involved in at all, and I think that's great. So this is actually the notifications pane in Qualtrics. If you've used Qualtrics, you might recognize this. And a while back, the engineering team for notifications decided they actually wanted to make a change to this little bell icon here, where they wanted to take that red dot that had a number in it, and they actually just wanted to simplify it and just have, instead of having a number, just have a dot. And there's several reasons that they did this that I won't get into. Long story short, this broke our product. In particular, it broke the notifications pane. But I think the amazing thing here is that this was like the first time I ever saw a team just catch this immediately, notify everybody. It became a big thing, and I started seeing Amplitude charts appear in all these docs that I hadn't written, and it was just amazing. And this team turned this around and went back to the old icon and was able to revert this metric. And I think this is just one example of a team kind of taking initiative and doing this on their own. So this is how we had empowered feature success. Next, I want to talk about the North Star piece, which I referred to earlier. For a long time in our journey, even after developing analytics function, even after adopting Amplitude, even after reading all the Amplitude docs about North Star metrics, we were still left with this complex product, which meant a lot of executives couldn't agree on what North Star metrics should be, and for a long time we just didn't have them. We didn't have usage-based North Star metrics. So to help inform stakeholders, we decided as an analytics team, we need to build a predictive model to actually understand which usage metrics tie to the business metrics of interest. But to do this, we had to gather a lot of feedback from stakeholders, including anecdotal evidence, user research, and we ended up with just this super long list that would have just been overwhelming to think about if we didn't have a good data set. But fortunately, we did. We, at this point, had pretty good design data, good governance, and it was pretty easy to make sense of the data we had and actually assemble a whole bunch of features we could put into a model. We were then able to extract the usage data easily we needed from Amplitude, and using this domain knowledge, build something really quickly outside of Amplitude and build some models. And I'm happy to say we've informed our executives now with some information about what usage metrics ladder up to business metrics, which has informed the North Star discussions. It's not the only way we set North Stars, but it's definitely informed the conversation and helped simplify it. And in some cases now we're surfacing our dashboards to, our North Star dashboards in Amplitude to executives. So now I want to explore the last piece of the puzzle, which I think has been the hardest for us, and we're still a little bit on this journey, but I think there's some really cool things that are happening here. So even after our product teams have started adopting Amplitude, we've kind of cracked the feature success piece. North Star started to come together. We noticed the sales success was still just a little bit slow. We had data now, it was clean data, but customer-facing teams weren't really using Amplitude. And I want to talk about Basecamp, which is one area of our product, which basically we offer training courses. And this team, for example, has been sending a lot of data back about signups that they were getting. But there wasn't a lot of usage necessarily from that team until we started a champions program, where basically we found analysts in our customer success team who started evangelizing usage data with their teams. And in particular, they used templates, the templates feature in Amplitude. I just heard today, I think we're the #1 user of templates. That may be wrong, but this has been an awesome way to basically shorten the learning curve for customer-facing teams who don't want to learn Amplitude and just get them to the right place. And the champions have done all the work of setting this up. This hasn't been any work on our core analytics team. So anyway, hopefully this provides you some great perspective on things you can do to get analytics beyond analytics. I also want to just provide a few other tips, because the thing is, I can tell you is if you implement 1 through 3 I just showed you, your usage will grow and you will still be overwhelmed. So I want to provide a few other bits of wisdom about how you can scale. The first is to just actually, and this is a little counterintuitive, make yourself as a part of the core analytics team a little bit hard to get a hold of. I think especially if you're used to being the hero with the team on your back, as I showed in the first slide, it's really hard to move to a culture where you actually have to let people struggle a little bit. But I think this is essential to creating a culture where people will self-serve more. And then you can do things like what we do is we have an office hours then twice a week where folks can come if they really have a question. But they've definitely thought about things now more when they come and talk to us. We just have a lot less fire drills by doing this. A second thing I can't recommend enough, and I already mentioned this, is descriptions and data governance. Wherever folks are consuming data, make sure it's easy for them to understand what that data is and to understand where it comes from and as much information as possible. It's tedious and it seems like grunt work, but that's maybe not going to lead to anything, but it's worth the effort. The third thing is we use an internal wiki to self-serve training and FAQs. There's a lot of great documentation on Amplitude, on the Amplitude website. But we found it's actually really helpful to put that in context, and we've been developing this wiki over time. And this prevents a lot of the one-off conversations, repeat conversations, which really frees up a lot of our time in the analytics team. And these resources have been super helpful. And then the last thing I want to call out is that we've chosen to work in 2-week sprints. This kind of goes back to the harder to get a hold of piece, but we really take the time to prioritize our work, and this has really helped us to work on the bigger stuff. We're able to use office hours for the smaller stuff. And I can't recommend enough using tools like Airtable, Notion, or Trello, or some other work tracker to make your sprints or work you're doing visible to your stakeholders, so they're not pinging you for status updates. You can just send them to a dashboard and they can see what's going on. So this has really been helpful for us to manage the 700 monthly active users of Amplitude we have and that scale. So anyway, that's it. That's pretty much everything I know. Hopefully you found this talk helpful, and I've showed you how to basically take analytics and extend it beyond the analytics team. I would be remiss if I didn't have a link here to a Qualtrics survey. I'd love your feedback. Also, we are hiring, so thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Geoff and Stephanie, for all of those insights. Really awesome to see a couple of accounts where we have 2 exceptional evangelists and product adopters here. And so we're just going to go on for another 10 minutes or so with a few Q&A questions that we sourced from the team. And so let's get started. So I think one of the first questions that you both kind of touched on, just by virtue of talking about having office hours, for example, or having coaches, is how you might graduate users from just consuming data and Amplitude to actually going about creating their own insights. So would love to hear, maybe Stephanie, if you could kick us off, how you think about that at WeWork and what you found successful.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a funny question because that sort of was a big part of my talk, but something that I didn't mention explicitly that I do think is important is that I think that there is a bit of a gap in K through 12 education in terms of data literacy, right? And that's no one's fault. I'm not pointing any fingers because the field has come up really quickly and tooling has evolved very rapidly. And so now it's, you don't need to know SQL in order to do analytics, right? But data literacy is really important. So whether you like it or not, whether or not you want to be an evangelist and a coach and a teacher, it is going to be part of your job as a data practitioner. And it's really important, right? Because it scales. Like, you do all this work to set up your data and your tracking, and you teach people how to use it, like teach someone to fish, right? And they'll feed themselves for the rest of their life. So the ways in which I do that, right? Like I said, like one-on-one sessions, and that's just for onboarding. But I totally agree that like in order to sort of force people to be uncomfortable a little bit and play around on their own, you kind of have to give some pushes, right? And so the expectation with my team is before you come to me with a question, it's okay if you get stuck, but I do expect you to have played around on your own in Amplitude. And honestly, people can get pretty far.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, I think I mentioned a lot of the things in the talk as well that we're doing here. But I would say I think it's really important, I think, to let people self-select into graduation as much as possible, and then also just I think you'll have to naturally have people self-serving more data as your team grows, and I think this is where having sprints and doing prioritization helps you make those decisions and find those cut lines. But I think that the thing that we've found is that our champion program that I mentioned has really kind of developed organically. It hasn't been something where we've said you're a champion or asked people's bosses to make them champions. It's really been we've found the power users across the organization who've been excited about it, and they've gravitated and become champions, and this role has emerged because of the value they're adding. So I think it's sort of also just keeping your ears and eyes open for those individuals in the organization who are already doing the work, and then praising them for it and making sure they get the recognition they deserve.
Awesome. Geoff, you mentioned in the examples you gave previously that the bell icon experiment led to you seeing Amplitude charts in places you didn't see them before. One of the things that we experience a lot at Amplitude is the distribution of charts in places like Slack, in places like Miro, in places like Confluence pages, that promote people seeing Amplitude charts and actually just going into it and digging into Amplitude themselves. So I guess a follow-up question here for you would be, what have you found effective at Qualtrics with respect to distribution of Amplitude? So how do you get the trends and findings that you have in Amplitude out into the hands of folks at Qualtrics?
Yeah, I think this is where there's a couple things we do. One is I think we have these product priority review docs that our PMs are writing every quarter when they're planning their roadmap, and making sure we have Amplitude charts in there that folks that are linked in those docs has been super successful. You'll just find a lot of embedded links around, I think, that go to Amplitude charts. Yeah. Another thing that I would say is that our team does do a lot of core research and uses things like notebooks that we publish out as well, and we do quarterly share outs with those. And I think those lead naturally to people going into the notebooks, having questions, and sort of that generates interest in clicking through things. But yeah, I would say maybe my answer is we don't have one way we're doing this. It's sort of, I think, something that's evolved, and we're just trying to make sure that there's as many links to Amplitude data sources as possible when we're talking about data somewhere in a doc or something.
Yeah, awesome.
That makes a ton of sense. I know that it's been a dream for our team to have some sort of newsletter or journal, and we're still lean, so we're not quite there yet, but it is on the dream list. Something that I have found effective is to just to demo a lot. So we previously had a practice of just like a regular monthly demo with the product team, and sometimes it was a little bit of a scramble because I was working on other stuff the entire month, but usually I would find that you can kind of just like explore a feature a little bit and just surface like small insights, or really just kind of like set some baseline expectations about how users are engaging with the feature, and that in and of itself is valuable, especially to the engineers and the designers who aren't always thinking about that necessarily. And then I also try to demo a lot at we have like larger like product organization demos. And maybe that's just my personality type, but like I do think that like a live person in front of you walking you through things is really helpful and gets people to engage, right? And that's like sparks inspiration and hopefully sparks curiosity too, and more of those light bulb moments.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, you mentioned tackling some of the fear of data earlier. So what advice would you have for other organizations here that are trying to tackle data democratization? So the understanding of data at folks' fingertips and the events available to them in Amplitude, et cetera.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, it's a few things, right? What I talked about most, or what I really got into was getting over the intimidation barrier. And so making it friendly, making it fun, that just requires a lot of praise, like you said, like really praising people and encouraging people and stuff like that. But the other piece is, once people are over that intimidation barrier, how do you make them owners? How do you make them feel like they are part of the data and it's their accountability, or they're accountable, they're responsible for knowing their metrics? And I think like one key step is instrumentation really, really should be a team sport, absolutely. That should be something that's part of the product development process, where product managers, the product team is accountable to, towards the end, identifying really crystallizing like what are we trying to learn about this feature, or how users engage with this feature, how are we going to measure it, what are the events that we're going to instrument to do it. And making sure that that's documented. So we also maintain visual and written documentation, and it comes up all the time. Every conversation I have, someone is like, oh, what's the event to, like what's the funnel or whatever, right? And I'm like, let's pull open that bookmark, pull open the tracking plan, pull open the documentation. And it's tedious work, but it's so important. And so, yeah, it's those two things.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think you touched on a lot of great points, and I guess the only thing I would add, and I think you really touched nicely on, I really think there's kind of a top-down and a bottoms-up component to data democratization, and I think you touched really nicely on the tops-down, which is it's so important to have an organization that values data and pushes for it. I think some of the bottoms-up things I would highlight, though, would be making sure you meet people where they are in terms of their interest in using data, and I think this is where like the templates piece I mentioned really comes in. A question I'm constantly asking myself is who are the people that are really interested in going deep, and how do we help them to do that and give them the more advanced resources to do that? And then how do we shorten the learning curve for people who maybe just need a dashboard and need a quick insight? And I think I touched on a lot of the things in the talk that we're doing specifically to accomplish that, but I think that's kind of how I think about the problem. And I think if you have both the top down and these bottom up, and you're serving kind of the folks from the bottom as well as having the top down piece, you'll be successful in that.
Awesome. I'll end us on one last question, since you have a number of us Amplitude folks here. Curious what you would like to see in Amplitude to just improve collaboration overall, if you could have that one feature request or the magic wand, like Justin put it.
Yeah, I think for us, one thing we've noticed is that we've had great adoption of Amplitude, sort of at the bottom of the organizational pyramid. Folks who are working with customers or doing feature development. We've had less adoption and kind of less interest and acceptance of Amplitude, really among the executives and the decision makers. And I think I would say that this is probably a function of Amplitude just being busy. A lot of executives want to see dashboards that are simple and sort of conform to the standards that they have in their head about how a dashboard should look. And I think this is where Tableau and Domo and other tools have the upper hand today for that sort of segment of an organization. So I think that's one area Amplitude could improve.
Awesome. Yeah.
Mine is a little simpler. I mean, I think like a big barrier to collaboration is just the fact that when you share a dashboard and you try to collaborate with someone, you then have to share permissions for every chart within it. And like, that's so painful, right? Like, why do something 12 times when I could just do it once? So that would be my biggest request.
Awesome. Well, I'll take note. I just wanted to thank you both one more time for coming up on stage today and sharing your stories about the organization and being here. It's really awesome to have customers like you to speak to, and thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.